Well, in just a couple days, it's going to be New Year's Day. And I don't know if you're the kind of person that makes New Year's resolutions or not, but I always like to refer to New Year's as a mile marker. There's nothing magical about the day, but it's just a marker where we can call what happened before that, 2024, and what will happen after 2025. So it's just a monumental moment where we can differentiate between the years. And for some of you, that's kind of a big deal. You can reflect on the past. We're looking forward to what's in the future, and maybe you're the kind of person that likes to make New Year's resolutions and how this year will be different than last year. Every year, whoever they are, comes out with a list of the top New Year's resolutions for the year. And so I found a survey that came up with the top 8 New Year's resolutions for 2025. And here they are, starting with number 8 and working our way up. 9% of the people that were surveyed said that they wanted to reduce spending. Not a bad idea. Number 7 was to quit smoking. 9% also said that they wanted to quit smoking. 14% said that they wanted to spend more time with friends and family. 15% said that they wanted to lose weight. 17% said that they wanted to exercise more. 19% said that they wanted to eat healthier. 21% of those surveyed said that they wanted to save more money. And the number one New Year's resolution, coming in at 43%, were those who said, I'm not making any New Year's resolutions. So the vast majority of those that were polled said, it's not for me. For whatever reasons, we don't know. Maybe they've done resolution in the past and they just didn't work out, so they just know that they're the kind of person that won't stick to a resolution. Or maybe they've just never made any in the first place. That's just not the kind of person that they are. But as we are coming into this new year, I wanted to share with you some thoughts on perspective. There was an older woman who went into an auto parts store. And she went up to the counter. There was a couple of men working there, and she asked them if they could help her purchase a new 710 cap. The employees, they looked at each other kind of puzzled. They weren't exactly sure what she was talking about. And she said, it's right on your engine. And it's a cap, it says 710 on it. They said, what kind of vehicle? They thought it could have been a Datsun 710, maybe. She said, no, it's a Buick, but I need the cap that says 710 on it. They just didn't know what she meant, so they slid her a piece of paper, and they said, could you draw what it looks like? It might help us out. And so she drew exactly what she said. She drew a circle about 3 inches in diameter, and then she wrote the number 710 on it. The gentleman behind the counter started laughing hysterically. She said, I don't see what's so funny. And they said, I think, ma'am, maybe what you need is an oil cap. This is what she had drawn. They were able to decipher her problem because they were looking at it from a different perspective. Having seen it upside down, they knew that she needed an oil cap. It says oil and not 710. But sometimes we need that. Sometimes, I'll be honest. You don't have to be as honest as I am, but I've had some scenarios in my life where I have been 100% convinced that I had something all figured out. I was right. I knew I saw it from every angle. I couldn't see it more clearly. I had this all figured out, and somebody was challenging me on something, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. It couldn't be more clear. And then someone shares with me some different perspective, and I have to swallow my pride and say, oh, okay, I wasn't seeing it from your perspective, and okay, you're right, I was wrong, and that's humbling, but oftentimes we need to do that. As we begin this new year, I want to challenge us to think about some things from a new perspective. And one of those things is this. that God is the main character in the story. You are the main character in your story. I'm the main character in my story, but who really cares about our stories? Our stories don't really matter all that much because we've been put on this earth by God as part of his story, and that's the story that matters. He is the main character. My daughter, earlier this month, was in a play, Finding Nemo Jr., in Alliance at the Carnation City Players group, and she is the beautiful little girl in the pink starfish costume. So I like to say that she was, in fact, the star of the show. But that's really not that true. But she did have a pretty cool supporting role. Obviously, Nemo is the star of the show. It's titled after him, and he's the main character. He's what the story is all about. But that story is super boring with no supporting cast. Then it's just Nemo swimming around lost. And that doesn't make for a very good story. But McKenna got to play this starfish. She had some funny lines. She got to sing and dance and play a supporting role. And when I think about God's story, I think about us as all being the supportive cast. We get to play our part in the story, but it's not our story. It's really God's. And sometimes that's hard for us because we want to be the center of our own story. Our world revolves around us. We can only see the world through our lenses. And so sometimes it's tempting for us to think it is all about us. It's all about me and where I go and what I do and what's in it for me. And I'm concerned about me and my future. And we lose sight of God's story. And to keep God in perspective, to keep God the center of the story, does take quite a bit of humility. The Bible's full of Bible verses that talk about humility. Let's look at just a few quickly. John chapter 3, verse 30 says that he must become greater and I must become less. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 2 says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. We're not the only ones in this story. There are other people, and we need to be patient with them, gentle with them, loving toward them. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, we read, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Proverbs 11, verse 2 says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace. But with humility comes wisdom. And finally, in James chapter 4, verse 10, it says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. I like that verse because it reminds us that we will be lifted up. We just have to start in the right place. We have to humble ourselves before the Lord and let God do what God does. The parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector is also a great parable to teach us about humility. In Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14, we read this parable that Jesus tells. And beginning in verse 9, we read, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. So we already know who the audience is, those who think more of themselves than they ought to. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week, and I give a tenth of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He wouldn't even look up to heaven. But he beat his breast, and he said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And then Jesus went on to say, I tell you that this man, the tax collector, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. As I was kind of preparing this sermon and I was reading through this parable, I thought there's something very fitting, very fascinating to me about what I found. In verse 12, we read that the Pharisee made mention that he fasts twice a week and he gives a tenth of all he gets. those two things are directly correlated with one's health and one's finances. Nearly all of the New Year's resolutions that we find people making at the beginning of the year deal with their health and with their finances. But this Pharisee, God wasn't impressed with his health and his finances. God was disappointed with his arrogance, and he was impressed with the tax collector for his humility. The tax collector had the right perspective. When he came before the Lord, he knew who he was before God, and he humbled himself. Baseball player Tug McGraw has a wonderful philosophy on pitching. He calls it his frozen snowball philosophy. He says, if I come to pitch with the bases loaded and a heavy hitter like Willie Stargell is at bat, I have no desire to throw the ball. But eventually I do have to pitch. And so I remind myself that in a few billion years, the earth will have become a frozen snowball hurtling through space, and nobody's going to care what Willie Sturgill did with the bases loaded. Tug McGraw kept things in the right perspective. I think sometimes we have a tendency to do that as well when we think something that's right before us is the biggest thing. And sometimes we have to step back and we look at the grand scheme of things and we put things in its proper place and we realize, does this really matter all that much? When it's right here, it looks huge. But when we step back and we look and we say, in the grand scheme of things, even 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, no one will care and this won't matter at all. That's keeping things in a proper perspective. Another thing that I want us to keep in perspective this year as we think about this new year is that last year was not a failure. I'm not sure why it is, but time and time again, I see posts on social media and I have conversations with people who at this time of year can't wait to close the door on the year behind them and look longingly and hopefully towards the year before them. Whether that's 2020, 2021, 2022, it doesn't matter. People seem to be very quick to say, boy, whew, man, what a year, huh? Like, ooh, can't wait to close the door on that chapter. Maybe this year will be better. But here's the reality. Life is a roller coaster. We all have our fair share of ups and downs. And so why are people so negative? Many of us tend to only see the hard parts of last year, and we hope for a better year to come. But weren't there plenty of moments of laughter this past year? And weren't there wonderful moments of love and thoughtfulness? And tender moments when people cared for other people and they met their needs and they hugged them and they felt God's love? I mean, weren't there sunrises and sunsets that reminded you that there's no way God isn't real? Weren't there at least a few moments this past year where you thought to yourself, does it get any better than this? See, we have the ability to choose whether or not we will focus on the positive or the negative moments in our lives. I think Paul was one of the best examples of what it means to be an optimist. He knew how to find joy in all circumstances, and that joy was rooted in his love and devotion to the Lord. Paul suffered imprisonment, beatings, sleepless nights, hunger and thirst, exposure to inclement weather, and yet he still penned these words to the church in Philippi. He said, "Rejoice in the Lord always." I will say it again. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition and with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Paul certainly did not walk an easy road. He had a lot of obstacles that he faced. And in the middle of all of that, he was able to say to those around him, listen, rejoice. I'll say it again, rejoice. There's so much good to live for. I don't know why it is, but I have learned throughout the past several years in ministry, in conversations with people, and specifically conversations with teenagers, that people are getting more and more anxious. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but notice in this passage what advice is given and what we can expect in return. Paul says to rejoice, and then he says, let your gentleness be evident to all. Be gentle to other people. And then he says, listen, if you do this by prayer and petition with thanksgiving in your heart, present your requests to God. Go to God. Keep God near. And this is what is in it in return for you. The peace of God, which transcends all understanding, which we can't even fully even understand. But the peace of God will guard your hearts and minds. Do you want peace? Then stay close to Jesus. This passage then continues in verse 8. Paul goes on to say, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Paul encourages his readers to keep things in the right perspective. Keep your mind focused on all of these good things, things that are lovely and pure and admirable and praiseworthy and excellent. Think about these things. Keep your mind focused on all of these things. And again, when you do that, what is the reward? And the peace of God will be with you. Now, there's one important thing to point out. We find that in verse 9. Paul goes on to say, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice. Now, there's only one way for us to be able to put those things into practice. We have to stay close to Jesus so that we can hear him and we can see him and we can learn from him, and so we know what to do to put into practice. But when we're doing those things, when we're staying close to Jesus, we'll be doing the right things, and God promises to give us his peace. I bet if I took a poll this morning and asked for a show of hands, how many people would love to have more peace today? I think a lot of hands would go up. We all want peace. We don't want stress. We don't want anxiety. We want to know peace. And finally, Paul had a right perspective about his life here on earth. We read in Philippians chapter 1, verses 21 through 24. Paul says, for me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I'm to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet, what shall I choose? I don't know. I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and to be with Christ, which is better by far. But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. And so, Paul has this beautiful outlook on life. He's so content to say, look, it's a win-win for me. If God chooses to leave me here on earth, I get to be with you guys, and I get to continue to do ministry with you guys, and I get to see the kingdom grow. And that's so wonderful. I'd be excited about that. That's a good thing for me. But you know what? If God calls me home, I get to spend an eternity with God forever. And that's every bit as amazing. And so it doesn't matter to me. If I had to choose, I'm not even sure that I could pick between the two. But either one is a win for me. I think that might be difficult for some of us to hear. Some of us fear death. Some of us we're a little tied too closely to this earth, and we think, death is scary, and it could be painful, and it could be drawn out, and it could be uncomfortable, and who wants to die? Who wants to lose their family and their friends? Paul says, really? But to spend eternity with Christ forever, we've got that hope. We all have that hope. That's an exciting thing. That doesn't bother me at all. I'm ready to go. If God wants to take me, he can take me. If God wants to lead me here, he can lead me here. I think there's some wisdom in that. I think for all of us, we could have that perspective. I mean, I don't hope I die today, but if I do, I know what's in store for me. And that's going to be pretty exciting. I don't know, again, if you're the kind of person that makes New Year's resolutions. Maybe you do. Maybe you've already started a list. Maybe you've got certain things you want to check off, you want to commit to. You're going to make this year better. I'm not anti-New Year's resolutions. That's fine. If you want to be healthier, that's great. If you want to get your finances in order, that's great. If there's something else on your list, I have no problem with that. But my message to you this morning is this. What is your perspective? Are your resolutions, are your desires for this new year to benefit you, or are they so that you'll be in a better place to serve God's kingdom? I would love for you to all be healthy and wealthy so that you can live long to serve Christ and you could use your finances to give in a way that no one has been able to give. I hope that you can give out of your generosity. I hope that we can all have the kind of perspective that says, I want to keep my eyes fixed on Christ so that whatever he wants to do with me, I can do. I want to be the best me possible so that I can be the best tool that God can use for his story. Because it's his story. It's not ours. If you've never made that commitment to Christ, maybe you're here today, it's on the verge of a new year, and you thought, I need to get back to church, I need to get some things straightened up. And you recognize that your health is not the most important thing. Your finances aren't the most important thing, but this emptiness in here that can only be filled by God is the most important thing. And maybe today's the day that you say, today's the day. I'm going to make a commitment to get my perspective right and put myself to the side and put Christ at the center of my life. We encourage you to do that. We celebrate if you would do that today. We would encourage you to come forward and make that profession as we stand together and we sing our invitation song.